All right. Well, hey, as we get going tonight, how many of you would be willing to admit that you are still a little bit afraid of the dark? Anybody? Yes. Yes, you are my friends. Yes. So the thing is that for as long as I can remember, I have been afraid of the dark. Yeah, and I know it's kind of like a kiddish admission, but I believed in the monsters under my bed, right? Like, did anybody have the weird spray you know your parents made up to like kill the monsters, you know? Yeah, and I was the kid who like knew the quickest route to my bed at night. Like I would stand by the wall where the light switch was. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about. And you're like, okay, let me make sure there's nothing in the way here. And as soon as the light goes off, you like run and jump into your bed, you know? You're like, I'm 15, it's no big deal. Yeah, like for as long as I can remember, I have been afraid of the dark. And during the summer, when I was going into 7th grade, there was this movie that came out called The Sixth Sense. Some of you, yes, you shouldn't be cheering because it's a weird movie. But so the thing is that you can cheer. My friend Lauren was having a birthday coming up, and because maybe she had issues, I don't know, she decided that we should all go see The Sixth Sense in celebration of her birthday. Now, if you don't know, The Sixth Sense is a movie about this little kid who sees dead people everywhere he goes. Not exactly like a birthday film, you know? And Bruce Willis is like helping him navigate this situation in his life, and everywhere he goes, he sees dead people, and they're trying to like give him messages and tell him things that he needs them to do and like all this stuff. And so I had seen the previews for it, and I was like, I don't know if I should do this. I'm like already afraid of the dark. And the real kicker is that not only were we going to go see The Sixth Sense, but we were also going to spend the night at her house afterward. Yeah, which is a real problem. And was a problem for me because if I was at my house and I was afraid, you guys know, like I just sleep with all the lights on, right? Totally a normal thing to do. But at my friend Lauren's house, I couldn't sleep with the lights on because I needed to like preserve my dignity. And so as a 7th grader, I'm like, all right, I can go because it's a really important time to say yes to invitations. As you guys know, middle school, those are hard years, and when you say no to one invitation, it's like you don't get invited back, and it's just like a slippery slope, you know? And so we go see The Sixth Sense, and it's terrifying. And we're leaving, and we're like walking out in the parking lot, and I'm like kind of dodging cars, because you never know where a dead person is going to show up. And I'm like, surely they're in these cars, and they're around the cars, and they're just walking through the parking lot, and I'm like, ugh. And so we go back to my friend Lauren's house, and I'm trying to be cool, I'm like, get it together, Anne, you are 12, like you have this, you can do this. And so we go back to my friend Lauren's, and we eat pizza and Gobstoppers, and like we each have our own 2-liter of like Mountain Dew, and middle school is just a hard time to know your limits, And so about midnight comes, and everybody's like, all right, well, let's go to bed. And so everybody's like finding their little places to go to bed. And I'm like, oh, okay, here we go, And everybody seems to be fine. Like, we didn't just watch a movie about a bunch of dead people, like as if we just watched like My Little Ponies, Like everyone's like, time to go to bed. And I'm like, how are any of you gonna sleep? And so I'm like, I'm gonna choose the bed because I don't wanna be on the floor, because here's the thing you need to know. There were 2 scenes that like really stood out to me in this movie. And the first was of this little girl that was underneath this bed, and she would come out at night, and maybe it was once or twice, but it felt like a ton of times. And she would come out and she'd be like, here, and she'd like have this box, and like she's like, I need help, and it was just like, oh. And then there was another scene of this mom who was like at the end of a hallway, and she had like something in the back of her head, and like she's dead, just like walking around like no bigs, And so like here we are, and I'm like, I'm going in the bed because there are definitely dead people on the floor. There's definitely a dead person underneath this bed, and I'm not gonna risk being on the floor and seeing her. It's just too much. And so everybody starts going to sleep, lights go out, and it dawns on me. I just drank a 2-liter of Mountain Dew, and I have to go to the bathroom, right? Not good. And so I sit up and I look to see like where the bathroom is, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's down a long dark hallway. Dead mom is there, I'm not getting out of the bed because little girl is there. And so I'm like, all right, I got a couple options. I could fall asleep on a full bladder and hold it all night, but I'm like, that's not gonna work because science, you know? And I'm like, or I could just like run down the hall and pretend all the lights are on and like just hope that I don't die out there. And I'm like, I'm not doing that because fear. And so then a third option comes to mind. And I'm like, I'm not gonna fall asleep on a full bladder and I'm not gonna run and risk death. And so I did what any rational person would do, and I just wet her bed. Yeah, I did it. I admit it. I wet her bed. And then you guys, you know what? I rolled over and I fell asleep. Great. And yeah, and the thing is that Lauren was actually like super nice about it. And thank God it was before Instagram, or I really never would have lived that story down. But it was not a great story to exist in the 8th grade hallways, but it also wasn't terrible. But I tell you that because the dark makes us believe some crazy things, right? Like, maybe you've never wet your friend's bed as a 12-year-old, but my guess is that you've believed some crazy things in the dark. And maybe you've never been afraid of the literal dark, but I'm betting that you've experienced some kind of darkness in your life. Maybe for you, it's shown up looking like fear, and you have been super afraid for as long as you can remember of a lot of different things, of new experiences, of a new school. Maybe for you, it's shown up looking like anger, and for some reason, there has been someone who has hurt you, or you have just not been able to get over it, and the anger has consumed you to the point that the darkness is so overwhelming, you've just decided to sit in it. Or maybe for you, the darkness looks like apathy, where it's not so much that you can feel you're in the dark because you don't even know it, you're so numbed out. Like life has been too hard for too long, and you've just decided to check out, and maybe if you don't care about anything, nothing will bother you. But the problem with that is that then nothing also makes you happy, right? Or maybe for you, darkness has looked like loneliness, and it's been a really long summer, and you keep seeing all these pictures of all these people having tons of fun, and you've just been waiting for this week so that you could be around a friend and not feel so alone. Or maybe for you, darkness has felt like shame. And there's something in your past that you've not been able to either forgive yourself for or forgive someone else for. And maybe that thing has come to identify you. Whatever it is, I'm guessing if you have a beating heart, you have experienced some kind of darkness, and maybe it's the kind of darkness that's plastered with an I'm fine, and everything's fine, but deep down you know it's not okay. And at some point, the thing is that all of us will experience some kind of darkness in our lives. But the problem is we live in a world of cheery memes and inspirational quotes that tell us to just keep going and life's gonna be great. And we also have 1,000 ways to distract ourselves the minute that something becomes uncomfortable, right? Like in our pockets at all times, we have a way to not feel pain because we can just numb out the minute that something feels hard or scary or too much. So when the lights go out and when things feel dark, my guess is you're tempted to run away from it, pretend like it doesn't exist, or get swallowed completely whole by it. But I think that there's something about the dark that unfortunately we often miss. Because it's when everything feels dark around us, when we have nothing left to grab onto to secure ourselves, when there's no one left to make us feel better, that is when things can sometimes become the most clear. And some of you know what I'm talking about. The darkness can lead us to the kind of desperation for God that we never experience when everything is going great. And I believe tonight that God wants to reveal something to us about our darkness, about how he shows up in our darkness and how he showed up in Elijah's when he is in the cave. I believe God wants to use Elijah's story to teach us to not ignore our darkness, but to sit with it long enough to hear his voice. And so if you have ever asked the question, where is God in my despair? Where is God when things go wrong or not the way I thought they would? Where is God when I feel hopeless? My hope tonight is that you can see that we are meeting someone who was likely asking the very same questions. And so if you have your Bible, go ahead and turn to 1 Kings chapter 19. And if you don't, we'll have it on the screen for you or on your Bible app. But we're going to pick up right where you guys left off with Michael this morning. And in this moment, all week long, you've been following along with Elijah. And we're going to pick up in a place where for the first time this week, he has gone to a place that God didn't send him. Everywhere else you've looked this week, God has sent him, but this is a place that God did not send him, and yet he still went. And what I love about the Bible is that it's full of people with real human emotions, just like Brad just said. And that helps us know that we are not alone in our own stories. And so let's go ahead and pick up in 1 Kings 19. We're going to be in verse 9. There he came to a cave where he spent the night. But the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah replied, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." As you talked about this morning, when Elijah showed up to the cave, he is over it. He's physically exhausted, he's emotionally taxed, he's mentally worn out, like he is done when he gets here. And God, after he's been in so much distress, God provides for him in two really tangible ways. And that is that God provides for him through sleep and a snack, which I think is pretty spiritually important advice, right? Like sometimes all it takes is just a nap and a snack for us to snap out of it. And that's how God provides for him. And then he goes on this journey for 40 days and 40 nights. And when we pick up here, he's just traveled that long. And so he enters this cave and he spends the night. And so here we find Elijah at the end of this journey, and he's in a dark and he's in a cave. And God starts talking to him. And he asks him this funny question: "What are you doing here?" What I think is funny is that it's not like God is confused or doesn't know why Elijah is there. And yet God asks this question, and he asks it more than once. And Elijah tells him, "Everyone has left me, and I am all alone, and I'm by myself, and not even just my enemies have left me, but the people that I trust." And if you've been in high school for more than 2 minutes, you probably know what this is like, right? Like, it's not the people that you knew were going to be mean or that you knew were going to be a pain, but it's when your friend betrays you, or when someone you thought you were cool with turns their back on you, that life gets really, really confusing, and that's where he's at. And God keeps talking to him, and he feels really alone. Let's continue reading in verse 11. "Go out and stand before me on the mountain," the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. What I find interesting is that the text seems to imply that Elijah is looking for God outside the cave, and he's still inside of it. And he's looking for him in all the obvious ways that you would think that God would show up. Like, surely God is in the earthquake or in the huge windstorm, or surely he's in the fire. He's looking in all the big, obvious places, and you and I do this too, right? Like, I don't know if God is in my everyday ordinary, but surely he's in the big, magnificent moments, so I'll just wait until I can experience him there. And that's where he is. And that's what Elijah's doing, but he doesn't find God there. He doesn't find God in the fire or in the windstorm. He's waiting for God to show up in the magnificent ways. And then we see God show up in the dark, in the place where he already is. In verse 12, "And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. God didn't show up in the earthquake or in a windstorm or in a fire, but in the sound of a gentle whisper. In the place where he already was, in the dark, in a cave, alone. And see, the thing about a whisper is that whispers are calm and soft. And I wouldn't know a ton about whispering because I'm a loud whisperer, but for most normal people, when they whisper, you have to lean in to hear them, right? You have to lean in to hear what they're saying. And I think that God wanted Elijah to lean in to hear him. Why else would someone show up in a whisper? You have to get quiet to hear a whisper. We lean toward a whisper, and that's what God wants from us too. He wanted to be close to Elijah, and he wants to be close to us. And so here God says to him again, he asks him the same question. And verse 13, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" This is the second time he's asked him. And again, it's not like God is confused. Like, why is Elijah in here? I don't know. Like, he's God. Like, he knows what Elijah's doing in there. But sometimes I think when we see God ask these questions in the Bible, or when we see Jesus ask questions in the Bible, they're more for the person on the other side of the question than they are for the one who's asking them. Like sometimes when we're asked a question, we have to sit with it for a little bit to even know the answer, right? And so he asks him again, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here in this cave?" And Elijah replies with the same answer. And I wonder if he was like, did God not hear me? Like, is he confused? Because he replies with the exact same thing, that not only has he served God with everything he has, but now he's alone and he's in a cave. He's discouraged by his own friends and he thinks he's by himself. And next we see God telling him, "Go back the same way you came." And God gives him some instructions about what is going to happen when he gets back there. See, everywhere we've been so far this week, God has sent Elijah. And here in this cave, God did not send him there, but God meets him here. And even though God didn't send Elijah to this cave, God follows him and meets him here. And God gives him some important instructions of what he needs to do next. And he tells him this important truth: I am not going to leave you alone. And then he tells him that when he gets back, there are 7,000 people that have remained faithful, that are going to be with you, that are going to join you. And he reminds Elijah of this important truth: you are not as alone as you feel right now. Right now you feel alone, but there are going to be people with you on the other side of this cave. And then Elijah goes and he does just that. And then in this powerful short conversation, takes place somewhere we'd least expect it. In a cave, in the dark, and in the quiet. I love this story because I relate so much to it. Like, I don't know about you, but when darkness comes for me, the last thing I want is someone to come pat me on the back and sing a weird little song and tell me everything's gonna be okay, right? Like when you're in the dark and you're in a cave, you know there is nothing more annoying than someone coming to you and be like, "It's gonna be okay," because you're like, you don't know if it's gonna be okay. Like, I'm in a cave, bruh, you know? Like, you're like, this isn't good. And God doesn't do that. He doesn't just give Elijah a pat on the back or give a little positivity quote. He meets him in the dark, in a cave. But at the same time, I often do what Elijah did. And I stay in the dark and I look on the outside for all the ways that God might be showing up, hoping that someone else can tell me why I feel the way I do, or something else can provide the answer, instead of sit long enough to ask the question, what am I doing here? And why am I here? Why am I sad? Why am I in the dark? And then wait long enough even for that. Have the patience to not get out my phone and scroll through or numb through something else, to hear and experience the presence of God. See, I think we have a very real problem with how we deal with our emotions around the darkness. Because when darkness shows up for us, when things get quiet, we don't usually sit with them long enough to ask the question, why? When your parents' marriage is falling apart, or when you're being bullied on social media, or when you pray for something to happen and it doesn't, we usually are left with one of two really terrible answers, right? Sometimes we think either God doesn't care, or maybe he's the one causing all of this. And those are two really bad options, right? But see, I think there's a third way. And I think we see it here in Elijah's story. I don't think those are the two terrible options. I think God wants Elijah to know that he is here with him and that he has not left. That while he did not cause Jezebel to do what she did, and he did not cause the Israelites to do what they did, he is still the same, and he is still present and here with him, even in the dark. And Elijah at this point has experienced the whole spectrum of life that you and I know so well. Because if you've been alive on this earth, you know this spectrum. You know that life is so good and life is so hard at the same time. And we don't get a pass on the life being hard part. But the problem is, if we don't acknowledge that life is hard, we also don't fully get to experience the joy that God has for us. And he here in this cave shows up for Elijah in a way that I think is so relevant for us. Because a life with God is not a life where we don't experience pain, but it is a life where we no longer have to endure anything alone. It reminds me of another story found on the other end of your Bible. You don't have to turn there, but in John chapter 20, we see another instance of God showing up in the dark, and I just have to share it with you because I think it's so relevant to what we're talking about tonight. See, in John chapter 20, after Jesus died and he was placed in the tomb, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. And scripture says in verse 1, early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb. And when she came, she found that the stone had been rolled away. And she starts flipping out. And she is really kind of unhinged by this. And so she goes to tell two of the disciples, Peter and John, that Jesus was gone. And John and Peter went to look. And when John gets there, he looked and he saw only clothes. And so then Peter goes in and he sees clothes and the wrapping that had been on Jesus' head folded up in a corner. But Mary stood outside the tomb crying. And as she was crying, she went to look inside the tomb, and instead of just seeing folded up laundry, she saw angels where Jesus' body had been. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" It sounds so similar to the question that God asked Elijah, doesn't it? Why are you crying? It's not a passive-aggressive question. And I think they knew the answer. I wonder if she was crying because Jesus was the only one that looked at her like she wasn't crazy and now he was gone. And she didn't know the end of the story. I wonder if she was crying because she thought this was the end and now his body is gone and someone has taken him. Because sometimes we have to sit and ask ourselves, why am I crying? Why am I sad? Why am I in the dark? What has brought me here? Because while it was still dark, she went to the tomb thinking it was the end of the story, but we know that it wasn't. When she looked into the tomb, unlike Peter and John, she saw angels, and I think we have to ask the question, why? Why did she see angels when they saw clothes? And the more I've read about this and heard other people talk about this, I just wonder if it was because she knew darkness so well, she saw light so quickly. Because she was the one who Jesus healed from demons. She had known darkness in deep, deep ways. And she looks into the tomb and she sees angels. And those of you who have been freed from deep darkness and stepped into Jesus' freedom know that when you've been freed from darkness, you see light quicker because you know what's possible. And when she turned to leave the tomb, there was Jesus. And she didn't recognize him at first. At first, she thought he was a gardener, which is like a big old whoopsie-daisy. You know, he's like the Son of God, come back from the dead. And she's like, you're a gardener, you know. But then he says her name. And she immediately knew it was him. For some of you tonight, I just want to ask the question for a second. Why are you here? Why are you here? And if you're in the dark, I want you to sit for just 1 second longer and ask, why am I in the dark? And do you need to sit tonight for a little bit to hear and experience the presence of God? Because just like he knew Mary's name, he knows your name. He knows your story. He knows everything that has happened to you. He knows every decision you've ever made and will ever make. And he knows who you are. Because sometimes it's in the dark when we hear God's voice in ways we can't hear it otherwise. It's when we're at rock bottom, when we have nothing left, when we're desperate. I think sometimes that can be the very best place to surrender. Because then everything's out on the table, right? Then all of our doubts, all of our fears, everything is out there. And Scripture tells us it's while we were full of sin, while we're in despair, while we're grieving, that God loved us. While it is still dark, this is where God can sometimes do his most redemptive work. Several years ago, I found myself in a really, really dark place. And I had just given birth to our son. And while I loved him so much, like more than I could even physically tolerate, I just loved him so much. At the same time, I was full of this darkness I couldn't understand. And in my mind and in my body and just in my whole being, I felt really, really, really dark. And some of you know what that's like. Where no matter how many sunshines you see or weird protein shakes you drink or laps around the block you make, you're like, I'm sad and I can't shake it. And so one day, I just said to my husband, something's up and I don't know what's going on, but I can't get myself out. And I'm scared. And so with the help of him and my friends from church and a really great doctor, I realized I was in the dark and suffering from depression. And so, it was like, all right, the sunshines aren't it and the laps around the block aren't it, and maybe there's something deeper here. And so I started going to counseling, which some of you maybe have been like, oh no, please don't tell a counseling story, but I started going to counseling, and here's the thing that you need to know about me. I am a person that loves lists and action. Any of you guys love lists? Yeah? Some of you in the room? And you're like, okay. I'm like, all right, depression. Okay, there's got to be 10 steps to beat that, for sure. And some of you are like, oh, this poor chick, And so I go to my counselor's office, and I sit down with her, and I'm like, okay, 1 through 10. I got my notebook out, and I'm like, just tell me what I got to do. How many laps do I got to run? Is there spinach I need to eat? What can get me out of this funk? I'll do anything. I'll eat kale even, And she just kind of looks at me, and she's like, all right, well, why don't you tell me about your childhood? And I was like, I'm not here for that, okay? I'm depressed now. I wasn't depressed then. Why are you asking me about that, And she's like, yeah. And I can just tell the look of empathy on her face, just like, oh, this poor woman. And she's like, yeah, why don't you tell me about your family and growing up? And I was just like, honestly, the thought in my mind was like, you are so annoying, I was like, why are you asking me this? And what she knew that I didn't was that this depression showed up for me in motherhood, but it had been laying dormant for a while. See, because there had been stuff in my back seat and then seat to the right that I'd just been shoving away and putting away in a box and hoping it wouldn't come back. And it jumped into the driver's seat for me. and I couldn't figure out how to get it out. But my journey out of the dark was making the decision to walk all the way out. Because I'd been standing in the back just hoping that I could peer out on the outside and something easy would fix it, but it wouldn't. It was bringing it all out on the table, and as I trusted the process and trusted her, I realized something really powerful. That to get out of the dark, you have to walk all the way out. You got to bring all of it, your fears, your doubts, your sin, your shame, your anger. And here's the beautiful news, that when you bring all of that to the feet of Jesus, not only can he take it, but he is a God who is so familiar with darkness because he defeated it. One of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, wrote these words that I've grown to love over the years. She wrote, "Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness, and it took me years to understand that this too was a gift." See, the gift of the dark is that when we've got nothing else left to grab, when we finally admit that we can't save ourselves, that is where new life can really begin. See, new life often starts in the dark. And not just physically, because think about it. It's a seed in the ground or a baby in the womb. Those things are in the dark. And new life can often start in the darkest places. Our emotions sometimes can beg us to break the ice around our hearts. God isn't just here for the happy things. He meets us in the dark. And I don't know what you walked in here with this week. I don't know what box of darkness you've put in a corner or put in the back seat and just hope to not open up. But what I know is that you're in really good company, and God is here to walk you out of your cave too. Tonight, I believe that you can name your cave because we serve a God who knew the cave too. He met Elijah in a dark cave, and he came to him in a quiet whisper. He sent his only son, Jesus, who wept real tears just like yours and mine at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. We worship a God who died and defeated death for 3 days in a dark tomb. Because while tombs are real and caves are real, and the pain that you and I will experience on this earth is very real, they are not the most real thing. It wasn't the end of Elijah's story, and it wasn't the end of Jesus' story, and your cave does not have to be the end of your story. Because the most real thing is resurrection. Jesus died a dark death and defeated every sin on the cross so that we could walk in freedom forever. And we don't worship a God of cheery memes and positivity quotes. We worship a God who knew darkness and met us in it. A God so familiar that even on the cross, Jesus cried out in despair. He knew every pain we've ever experienced, and darkness is not dark to God. Because while you may feel dark tonight, God is here. He is with you, and just like he was with Elijah and went into the place that he was already in, he has done that through his son for you and for me. Because see, the voice that spoke the universe into existence is the same voice that shows up for you and I tonight. It's the same voice that whispered to Elijah in the cave, that rose Jesus from the dead, that turned water into wine, that spoke through burning bushes. It's the same voice that whispers to us tonight, that meets us in hard places and can bring hope and light in the midst of our very real lives. He still brings order to chaos. He still makes beauty from ashes. God is here, and he is as close to you tonight as the air that you breathe, and not just tonight. He is close to you in your room, in your school, in your family, in that situation that you think will never turn around. He is as close to you as the breath you breathe, and you can always have as much of him as you want. And I don't say this to you because I have to. I don't say this to you because CIY asked me to. I say this to you because I've lived it and I've seen it. And I don't know what the last year of your life has been like, but in mine and for the people that I love, there have been people in darkness whom I love so much in ways that have broken my heart and gutted me this year. I've seen people in despair in ways that have made me cry out to God, and at the same time, I've seen God redeem things in ways that you wouldn't imagine. I've seen him put back together marriages in ways that I never could have dreamed, and families in ways that I never could have even began to ask for. And it's because he's still the God of resurrection. And so God doesn't need you tonight to get your life all cleaned up before you come to him. All he wants to do is meet you exactly where you already are, in the dark and in the cave. And he wants to remind you that he is here. He died and rose again, defeated all darkness so that you and I could walk in freedom forever, not just in this life, but in the life to come. Revelations 3:20, Jesus says it this way, "Look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends." Tonight, let him remind you that he is here. Let me pray for you. God, I thank you for your word and for stories that remind us of our very real emotions and that you are with us in the good and the really hard. God, I pray tonight for every student in this room who walked in with a box full of darkness, who's kept it off in a corner and said, "I'm not dealing with that." God, I pray that you would remind them that you meet them in the dark, where they already are, and that you would also remind them that you're going to walk them out. God, I pray for every adult in this room that's going to shoulder those burdens with their students and who also has burdens of their own, that you would remind them that you are here with them too. That this isn't just a week for their students, but it's also for them to be reminded that you are very present and very real and that you are here. And that you are a God of resurrection. Jesus, we love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen.